G'day, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the Scale Ups podcast. I am interviewing Anita and Paul Panebianco, co-founders of Nexacu. This is a previous client of mine who had an amazing exit last year, sort of middle to late last year of 22. And they really achieved some fantastic outcomes. Not every day you get to sell your business for $20 million when you're a small business founder. And they really did a fantastic job of building this business. Great systems, great people, good profitability. Good sale process, relatively quick sale process, and good style of exit for them. So I really want to bring them on today to talk about their experience, the experience of selling their business and you're selling your baby, which is kind of what it feels like, the implications of all of that, what they learned through the sale process, the preparing of the business for sale, a whole bunch of things. Now, one thing to say is when we actually got into the recording, we found it a little bit tricky. We were missing bits of what each other were saying. And we couldn't tell whether actually that was being picked up by the recording or not. So there might be a few bits that sound a little bit stilted, but the recording quality should be fine. And should be if you're wondering why, like these guys had like some awkward moments, it wasn't because we felt awkward. It was just the technology. So I hope you enjoyed today's podcast.
Welcome to the Scale Ups podcast, where each week you get to hear Sean Steele, professional CEO, growth mentor, and advisory board chair, unpack the strategies that successful founders have used to achieve scale in their businesses. Stay tuned as he interviews the entrepreneurs who've made it, learns from industry experts, and follows a group of founders still striving to scale.
G'day, everyone, and welcome to the Scale Ups podcast, where we help first-time founders learn the secrets of scaling so they can fulfill the potential of their business, make bigger decisions with greater confidence, and maximize the value and impact they can have in the world. I'm your host, Sean Steele, and my guests today, guests plural, are Paul and Anita Panebianco, former co-founders of Nexacu. Do you become a former co-founder? I guess you're still always the co-founder, aren't you? Not sure what the right way is to say it. How are you two?
Good. Good, thanks, Sean.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Excellent. Well, it's great to. Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's nice to have you both again. Look, I guess a bit of context for the audience. I'll sort of set up what we're talking about today. We met in late 2020, I guess, and we started a sort of mentoring and advisory relationship, looking at how to help you develop a growth strategy for your business and execute it and continue to build the foundations of your business that was going well and scaling well. And a year later, I'd say probably about a year later, we'd certainly been chatting about when you might consider selling your business and what style of exit might you be thinking about and so on. And I introduced you to someone who I thought might be a potential future strategic buyer for you guys, which was actually my old business, Adventure Co. So I introduced you to the COO, who's still there today and going strong. And I remember you guys weren't in a rush to sell at that stage. And I remember saying to you, one of the best things that you can do if you're thinking about selling to a strategic buyer is actually to build a relationship with them, let them get a feel for you get a feel for them, because there's a lot about, the ability to work together. And lo and behold, that same company ended up acquiring you almost a year later. So what I really wanted to do was, it's such a unique experience. It's something that, lots of founders aspire to do and may only ever get to do, may never get to do, or may only get to do once or twice in their life. And so I really appreciate you guys coming on, because I know you don't love the limelight between the pair of you, but you built a great business that was, attractive to a buyer. You achieved a great outcome, and it's such a unique process. And I think, your insights into, what it's like to sell your business will be really insightful for founders who are at a similar stage. So thank you again for your time and your generosity. And maybe you could just kick us off by explaining a bit about what Nexacu does. What's the problem that you sort of built it to solve? What kinds of customers? What's the business model? Just tell us a bit about the business.
Paul, you want to take this one?
I'll take that one. So we're Nexacu is a training company. We do instructor-led training to end user computer users, I suppose, put simply. Our training courses are generally day long. They run around day-long format in every capital city around Australia and also remotely. End user, they're focused on the end user. So the courses that we teach are generally application-based. So it could be something as simple as a day-long Excel course. But there's also PowerBI, SharePoint project, and there's about 12 categories of courses, about 30 courses across 12 categories. And generally in a day-long format. So yeah, that's basically what we do. It's as simple as that, instructor-led training for end users. And the reason they would do it, for productivity gain, maybe for simply just awareness, to build awareness, generally sponsored by work to attend, and that was our business.
Yeah, that's right.
And I've sat in some of your courses. So I did both of your what did I do? I like a sort of intermediate and advanced Excel course, which I absolutely loved, because it's the kind of thing that everybody ends up having to do at work, right? But no one ever teaches you actually how to do it.
Correct.
And you don't need a degree to get better at Excel, but you do need some time with someone who actually knows something and who can show you with real life applications. And so I know that actually the business started around Excel, didn't it? And then sort of grew from there. What can you just give us an example of some of the applications that are the most typical or the highest priority courses, Anita?
Yeah, so I guess at the beginning it was only Excel, and then we expanded the offering into more basically across all the applications, Word, SharePoint, project. We then in about 2016 started out 2017 with PowerBI, which was quite new at the time. And not many people were offering courses. I think we were the only ones to offer a course nationally in Power BI. So that was definitely something we jumped on board with pretty quickly. And that and Excel be pretty closely aligned applications and have definitely been some of the strongest courses, for us to date. Well, until the point that we sold the business. So they were probably our main sellers, but really at different times it kind of ebbs and flows. Office 365 Teams became very important during COVID when everyone went remote. So we kind of tried to cater just to the corporate world. I mean, it's Microsoft products, so almost everyone was using them in the workplace. It was quite a broad base, but we weren't focused on.
It's pretty much everywhere, but I assume
exactly.
At some point, that means there's going to be Chat GPT courses now, Anita, because I'm sure it's not that far away before it's integrated into every 365 product.
Yep. We'll have a little play around with that one, I think. But I'm sure it's on the way.
I'm in the middle of a Chat GPT course, trying to understand how to do it. How to do prompt engineering well. Because there's like Excel, you can figure out a whole bunch of stuff by just sort of guessing and playing and iterating, but it's actually quite valuable to learn. The structure of how it works, so you can use it far more efficiently, far more quickly.
Exactly.
Can you guys give us just an overview of when you mentioned you started the business in 2015, 16, and what size did it get to when you sold it, and if you're open to sharing what you sold it for? I know some of that information's public, but what can you just give us a sense of that? The stage that it got to when you got to the sale.
So we started actually in 2013. And started pretty basic. It was just pretty much myself and Anita, and we grew it. Well, it grew every year. It grew, especially when we transitioned from consulting into training, because we didn't start out as a training company. We kind of changed or transitioned into that, and so we grew pretty impressively, I suppose, every year. 2019 was a great year, and then the brakes were hit on us in 2020 when COVID hit, and then coming out of COVID, we had a fantastic sort of exit out of COVID, and I suppose at the time we sold, the enterprise value of Nexacu was 20 million, and the earnings were just under 3 million.
Just under 3 mil, so pretty close to 7 times EBITDA, which is a great, just under 7. Yeah, which is a fantastic outcome. I know there's a lot of people listening today who'll be like, "Wow, imagine if I could get 7 times for my business," and they might only be at 500K or $1 million, or between somewhere between 1 and 3, but it shows you what's possible. And so what I didn't want to do is I don't want to spend all the time on the financial side, because but I'm really interested in kind of unpacking the journey, and then also really understanding what the sale process is like as a founder for people who haven't been through. So can you just talk about maybe what some of the more challenging aspect of the early days were?
Yeah, I'll take that one. I mean, the early days are pretty tough. It's pretty lonely. It's just yourself and your own belief that you can grow it into something. or you might not even have that belief. Maybe you're just sort of buying time until it ends, or you take another job. So I suppose the way Nexacu started was when we relocated to Brisbane and set up our family here. Couldn't find a job, so I decided at an early point in the job search to put an ad up on Gumtree and sell myself as a consultant doing Excel consulting, because that's all I pretty much knew, and that's all I pretty much thought that other people would value. So it was an ad on Gumtree, and to my surprise, started getting a couple of inquiries. And my first client, I remember going out to the Brisbane markets and working out there. He had a sort of some kind of pricing spreadsheet, and sitting there in his office in the Brisbane markets. And I put myself forward at a very low rate, a very below market rate, because I didn't want any resistance to.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to start work straight away, just get something in, just get started, just get out of the house and just get started. So there was no rule. I wasn't being fussy with the types of clients or the type of work. It was pretty much just get going. Let's just get going, get some money in the door, and just get out there and do some work. So that was the approach in the early days. Just don't worry too much about whether I'm earning the right work, whether these are the type of right clients. It was just not fussy at all.
Get some customers.
Yeah. So. And that worked well, because they obviously, it was at the end of that very first day, he's like, okay, so I'll see you tomorrow then. And then at the end of the next day, I'll see you next week. And in the meantime, you get a few more inquiries, and it sort of builds up from there. And they do the same, and it builds up to the point where, you can start to increase your rates, or you can start to be a little bit more selective with your clients. Before we did that, I actually got Anita. Anita actually picked up some clients as well. So Anita was busy raising kids. We had a young family, but managed to work on the days the kids were in daycare and stuff like that. So we did that for about 18 months. And then towards the end of that 18 months, it started to get a couple of training requests. So, you're good at doing this. Why don't you show us how to do this? And I wasn't at the stage where I was knocking back work. I was sure, I'll do that. I'll teach you how to do that. And so might have done a lunch and learn or an afternoon learn with a group of staff. And then, we had a website. Then I suppose we added training to the website. This is what we do. This is the services. These are the services we offered. And it got to the point where we started doing a few more sort of training jobs, and even flying to Sydney and Melbourne to do a day-long training. So they were pretty tough days. So getting up at 4 and 5 in the morning to make a Sydney or a Melbourne start at 9 a.m. and then finishing up and catching the plane, be back, late 10 or 11 p.m. And then also long days. We bought some computers at a secondhand computer shop in the suburbs of Brisbane, and we started. I even started carting them around. So they were in the boot, or they went in the plane in a suitcase, packed up in laptop bags.
Suitcases of laptops.
Yeah. So that became a little bit difficult, and then sometimes we couried them ahead of time, and then we met up with the boxes and stuff like that. Anyway, so it was all that kind of stuff. Not knocking back. We sort of, and there's some funny stories there as well. And where we put ourselves out there to be some things that we probably weren't. We made ourselves look a bit larger than what we were, or more credible than what we were. It was really just Anita and I, after the kids go to bed, packing up some laptops and getting some manuals and sending them here and there. So, it's pretty lonely, and you've got to be persistent, and it's not for everyone, because sometimes you're not earning enough to sustain yourself and your family, and you're still dipping in the savings. So it's a pretty tough time. I would say that's probably the toughest time, is getting out of that, growing out of that, and earning enough to sort of sustain yourself. So we were still dipping in the savings in the first 18 months. I think definitely in the first 12 months, and maybe up until 18 months, and then after that we were probably supporting ourselves. So it took that while, that time. And in the meantime, people are calling up, offering you a job, or I've got this great role. And you've got to be pretty disciplined to say, no, I think it sounds great, but I'm going to give this more of a go, even though you're still dipping into savings. So that's pretty tough.
Yeah. It's where your belief gets challenged, right? Like,
Absolutely.
How much do you believe in it? Because there's always someone offers you a sort of seemingly easier path, but maybe not a path that you think is sustainable or scalable.
Correct. And you've come from a professional life. And also, Sean, you come from a professional life and you've earned a good income up until that point. And here you are battling around, moving laptops and manuals around and working for clients that, working for any type of client, doing any type of work. So that's really tough.
Yeah. Understood. And what about, from your perspective, Anita, was there a particularly difficult moment or challenge that you guys faced in the scaling process that really sort of stands out to you, or for you as like one of the toughest moments?
In the early days, I mean, I have some. Yeah, there were some times where I questioned our decision, because I'd kind of gone from working on Wall Street to sitting in the back shed, adding up, figuring out prices for clients on spreadsheets, and I did question it a few times, but yeah, you got to kind of stick with it and try to focus on where it's going. So I think it's probably quite normal to have those doubts at times. At the start, it can be a bit scary. You don't really know where it's going to go. All you can do is keep pushing forward and hope that it's going to grow. So we stuck with it. Yeah, we were quite positive, I suppose. It's good. It's a bit of a resilience. I think you kind of have to tough it out for a while, but that was a challenge. And look, to be honest,
you end up with those moments, don't you, where you're like, well, how much more resilience and character building do I need?
Exactly.
Like, I think I've got enough now.
Yeah, we're probably good to go. So that was a bit of a challenge. And also, I think just the timing of it was difficult at the start, because we'd relocated here from London and, we had no family support. It was pretty tough going with 2 kids. So all of that probably combined, it was a bit tough. But once I think we got out of that first 18 months or so and felt like we'd made some progress, you kind of hit a base level that you're more comfortable at, then we kind of got a taste for it, to be honest. Yeah, Paul was always very keen to start his own business. I was a bit more reluctant, I would say, at the start, but once I got a taste for it, it kind of I was happy. I was on board at that point.
Yeah, it starts to bite, doesn't it? Exactly. Well, you also realize it's such a creative endeavor for which you get pretty quick feedback too. So, once you start applying that creativity and you start getting some wins, it's really interesting. It's sort of addictive little game, because it's just up to the two of you and your ingenuity and your thinking. And
we used to high five each other in the home office when we got our sales, So yeah, it's good memories.
Yeah. So when did you guys determine that it was the right time to sell the business, and like what factors fed into your decision-making process? Because, certainly the business was going very well and it would have continued, no doubt. You had a very strong trajectory. And so I know we had lots of conversations about, well, do we sell? Don't we sell? I mean, the business is going well. We've got no real reason to sell, but everything's for sale at a price.
Correct. Yeah.
How did you determine it was the right time to sell the business?
Paul, do you want to take it?
I was always keen to know about the end game, because we built it up. Yep. We had the sort of start and the middle, and we'd learned and got comfortable with that. But the end game was something that was always a bit of a mystery to me. Look, maybe we'd grown it to the point to a certain size where, I wouldn't say it wasn't fun anymore, but it was definitely I was losing a little bit of enthusiasm. It just became the challenges were just you'd have to have doubled down or recruited so many more staff in order to keep that growth trajectory going. So I suppose we reached a point where we were the decision point where we wanted to understand the value of what we were sitting on, because it's pretty hard to value a business. They don't transact that often. And so there was a definite process there, maybe 21, or maybe when we were having discussions with yourself about value. And so we wanted to sort of test the waters a little bit. And so that's where we engaged Ben Wilson from TCA Partners, who suggested we do understood where we were at, and then suggested that we do just a market sounding process, where we provided him, say, a dozen names. He
Mm-hmm.
did some research, provided a dozen names, and then he went off and he sort of did a bit of a confidential approach to them on a no names basis. If this company, described the company without saying Nexacu, and would you be interested in selling? And he reported back to us. And that took him a couple of months. He reported back, and out of that process, out of say 24 parties that were contacted, most weren't interested. Some were mildly interested, and 3 or 4 were very interested. I suppose you just sort of categorise them all. And that was basically it. We paid him his money. That was a good process, and that was interesting. And he sort of put a bit of a price sort of estimate on there as well. And that was it. We kind of left it at that, and we got busy again, and kind of we went on with our life. And then 2 months later, we just had an approach sort of out of the blue. I don't know if you can call it out of the blue, because we kind of dangled a little carrot out there in the distance, but we got an approach from one of those parties, and that was Adventureco, who was one of the parties that were initially approached. I think they might have worked out it was us, and we already had some little discussions and a little introduction there, which sort of helped, and that was the start of the process.
Yep, beautiful, and such an interesting process there, because again, you had been brought into their awareness. So I know that when they saw no names basis opportunity come up, it was easy for them to kind of put two and two together. But therefore, they already had a positive representation of you guys in the business, and a bit of insight, which again just helps to sort of smooth those waters. Can you talk us? I'm really interested in some of the pieces of the actual selling. So, what did you have to do to prepare the business for sale? So talk to people just a bit about, to the audience, about the kinds of elements of due diligence, and then talk us a bit through the negotiation process.
I'll take that one, Anita.
I'm going to go, Paul. You ran a lot of the due diligence.
Yeah, well, in the due diligence, I suppose once we determined value, these questions come through, maybe, 100 questions on a Friday afternoon. Look, to be honest, I'm accountant background. I like to think that I had things in order and was able to answer most of those. I think I responded to maybe 95 of those by Sunday night. So, and there was just a few, the sort of a little bit too hard basket. So I think that gave a good impression that you're able to give a prompt turnaround on things. You've got your house in order. And the other questions, I feel like it was either needed to understand the question or just needed access to it. So that was pretty straightforward, and I sort of prided myself. Maybe it was because of my background, living as a prior career as an accountant, being somewhat organised, and and kind of knew and expected what kind of questions that were going to get asked. And then in terms of value, well, that's the tricky one. Because you have to be comfortable. You have to be comfortable with your number, I suppose. To be comfortable with, you have to work out what the number is, and then working out the number is not an easy process. So you get offered a multiple, and then a multiple of what? Of your earnings. Like, okay, well, what exactly are your earnings? Because they've got a different definition of earnings than what you might be thinking your earnings are. So, and then what's the window you're looking at? We're a little bit seasonal as well, so we wanted to make sure that we're capturing the upswing of the end of the financial year into our numbers. So there was a little bit of projection that we had to sort of live up to, which we luckily did. So yeah, your number is finding a number that you're happy to walk away from.
And there's an element of timing there, isn't there, Paul? In that, if you've got a business, for example, that has typically a very strong H2, so in an Australian financial year, that's January to June, and you maybe have a lesser first half, then it's actually really valuable to be thinking about the timing upon which you go out to market and the timing you're likely to be in a deal structure. Because if you've got 3 months, if by the time you're negotiating a deal, you're 3 months before the end of the financial year, everybody kind of accepts that we're going to be talking about a number for the end of this year. But if you're 3 months into the year, everybody's talking about last year's number, even though you might have a really stellar year coming up. And so timing is a really interesting factor, I think, in depending on what the seasonality of the business model looks like.
Yeah, so we did 9 months actual, 3 months projected, and the 3 months projected was Q4 was by far our biggest quarter. So there was a big projection in that number that we had to live up to. So once we agreed value, it was based on a projection, and we just had to
Yep.
keep our head down and make sure we got to that number. Otherwise, the value probably wouldn't have stacked up for them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we did it. But I agree, especially when you're growing, the numbers don't make sense. The historic numbers don't really make sense anymore. So yeah, that window is really important.
Were there some surprising, I don't mean because of the buyer that you were working with, but were there some elements that you hadn't really given a lot of thought to that ended up being part of the negotiation, like, how long you'd stay, or like, where the kind of term, I guess any deal structure, so, sometimes people can fall in a trap of thinking, well, it's just a multiple of earnings and that's pretty much how the valuation, like that's pretty much the deal structure. But there's a lot of other things that can kind of start to flow into that. Were there some ones that you hadn't really given consideration to that ended up being something that you were either able to flex or leverage in your negotiation?
Well, ours was pretty straightforward, I guess, in the end. I think the time that founders are required to stay on can often be quite long, or there can be an earn-out, there can be different structures. We didn't have an earn-out, which I think worked for both parties, so it wasn't a huge element of negotiation. We were happy to do that too. And because I think they were strategically, quite aligned, very familiar, given their other businesses with Nexacu and more or less how training businesses operate. They're already in the space. They were happy for myself and Paul not to be on board for that long.
Yeah.
So that's not always possible. Depends on the buyer and the situation. Yeah. But it worked out. Yeah, it worked out well for us, and I think that it's been a good outcome. It'll be tricky. Yeah.
I think that's really worth just pausing on for a moment. Yeah, because that's something that, people often don't really give a lot of consideration to in terms of, you might go out to, let's say you've got an M&A advisor who goes out, susses out the market, they get a bunch of interest, you get a bunch of, non-binding indicative offers from which to decide, well, which party are we going to deal with. And to your point, some people will say if it's a vendor operated business where the vendors are actually actively involved, they're operating, they're doing stuff, they don't have a single point CEO or general manager in place, then that of course can create a lot of risk for the buyer depending on the nature. So if a buyer sees more risk with vendors leaving, they're obviously going to seek to find ways to have the owners stay longer to reduce the risk that their earnings go backwards and the value of the business they bought just deteriorates. And so quite often people will see earnouts where they've got, a percentage of the total values held back, or maybe there's a kicker, when they hang around and there's another target that's met, whether it might be revenue or it might be earnings in a year's time or 2 years' time. And, but of course, it's not the easiest thing in the world to be a founder who's run your own business for a long period of time and then find yourself essentially back pretty much as an employee with, now essentially having a board and investors who've got a lot of say in how it works out. And some founders really find that an incredibly difficult period, that earn-out period, and not that many founders get to leave very quickly. However, in your case, to your point, just to create clarity for the audience, if you were to find a strategic buyer who already understands your business model, already has their own people, already has management capability, their risk is materially reduced if the founders leave. In fact, they might even find it favorable because it allows everybody to get on with their lives and for them to just start operating it the way they want. But the more they're in your business already, the more they understand it, the lower that risk is for them and the more likely you are to be able to get out of the business earlier.
Yeah.
So that's,
and for us, it
sounded like ultimately that worked well for your objectives and for theirs.
Yeah. It was 3 months, but it actually became 6 weeks. Yeah, 6 weeks more out of it.
It was very short.
And 6 weeks is pretty unusual.
It was a bit of a shock to the system when
it was very quick. It was very quick.
When you've built a business for so long and then you're out straight away. It took us a while to get our heads around it, but we've adjusted pretty quickly.
Eventually you adjust.
Take a nice holiday. That's what I recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. Probably, because founders don't tend to typically take a lot of holidays when they're in the process of scaling. So, what about through that process, lessons that you learned or advice that you received that was helpful during the negotiation process?
Yeah, look, we got we probably got a lot of advice. Our advisors at TCA were really good. Sean, we spoke to you a bit as well. Just, I think it's important to have people that you trust that you can bounce things off, because you don't usually go through, you might go through this once in your lifetime. So it's not like you've got a lot of experience in the space, in the negotiation kind of phases. So I think it's important just to have someone you can rely on. But also, I think what we found was that you've just got to kind of be true to yourself and stick with, kind of go with your gut, because if you do sell, you got to be happy with what the outcome is at the end. You got to be happy to walk away on your terms. And I think it's easy to get caught up in the whole process, but you've just got to kind of try step out of it and make sure that, okay, if this actually goes through at this level on these terms, are we going to be happy with that outcome? Because it can become a bit of a train and it's just in motion, but you got to kind of, we did have a few conversations late on Sunday nights at home. Just, is this really what we want to do? So we were happy to proceed on those terms, but if it hadn't, I guess, if we hadn't gotten there, then we were also quite happy to continue working the business. We weren't, really looking to sell necessarily. So it's just, if it all falls into place, then well and good. But don't be pushed, I guess.
And that's, I think there's something really critical in what you just said, Anita, which is if you, it's no different to a property sale process. If you've got a vendor on the other side who's highly motivated, desperate to get out of the deal because there's a divorce going on, or there's been a death, and the kids are fighting, and everybody wants to just get it done. As the buyer, you've got a bunch of leverage that you wouldn't have otherwise had, because you understand that they're a highly motivated buyer. So if you think about setting yourself up for success as a founder, you want to be in a position where you feel strong, like you can walk away. You know what your walk away price is, or your walk away terms. You know what you won't negotiate on, so you can be firm on them, because you know what you're like. Well, if it doesn't work out, we don't need to sell anyway, and we'll just keep running the business, and then we'll think about it later. And that creates a real position of strength.
Yeah, we'll take the earnings if we'll keep them. We'll keep them, and you don't buy us. Yep.
Yeah.
So it came down to as simple as that.
Right. And if for people who are thinking about that, don't forget that when you think about a multiple of earnings, if your business is scaling up, as your business is still scaling up, if if you can sell for 3 times, you'd have that money back in 3 years, because it's represents 3 years of earnings. But if your business is growing 30% year on year, you're going to have that money back in 2 years. So then you start asking yourself, well, am I going to sell the golden goose that's laying the egg? And so on the one hand, it's always exciting to get a bag of cash that you can walk away with. And on the other hand, some people sell too early or for the wrong price, and then wonder why they sold it in the first place, because actually it was the thing that was providing a lifestyle and income. They enjoyed going to work. They were enjoying the business. And at the same time, we always you can't predict what the future of the business is going to be like. Yes. And so sometimes we think it's rosy today and we might have great tailwinds, but we might run into a future period. We might go really well for the next several years, and then we run into a big period of headwinds, and then all of a sudden we're wishing we sold. And so there's never a right answer. To your point, it's always about thinking about all those factors and going, given all of that, given this deal and given how we feel about it, is it the right deal for us or not?
Yeah.
Correct. And that was going through our mind as well. So we knew that Adventure Co one day probably would want to get into the space that we occupied, and they were pretty motivated to get into that space, and they were looking to buy Nexacu just to sort of, it was a shortcut to getting there rather than growing it themselves. So that was one thing we had to consider as well. While we do have a good, we've got this buyer that's highly interested, strategically aligned.
If we wait too long, we're going
to might not be there in the future. So that was another big factor,
big component. If you look back on your time in building Nexacu, is there anything you would have done differently? And if so, what was that and why?
I don't think we could have done lots of things differently. I guess we could have grown faster and, taken on more risk, but I think we did it in a way that we were comfortable with. So we kind of grew it quite organically. We didn't take on any debt. We kind of grew at a sustainable pace, I guess. And also, look, for us, it was also really important to balance it with the family and time at home. So I feel like we could have done more. We could have gone faster and harder, but that would have come at a cost. So I wouldn't probably change that. I think we're quite happy with how it panned out. I think in any business,
How did this journey?
In any business, you can always do more. You can always do more, try new things. And I think, sure, we'd spoken about in training, especially, there are always those shiny balls and many things that you can look to do and explore. So there are no end to probably the opportunities, but you've kind of got to pick and choose it and know that, it can come at a cost, I guess. So, while there are different things we could have done, I wouldn't probably change it. Pretty happy with the outcome, so we've got to kind of, take it for what it is.
Great outcome. So if you think about the experience you've just been through, and if you go back to when you started the business, which is only like eight years ago, maybe. And when you started the business, you weren't thinking, oh, in 8 years' time, we're going to get a $20 million sale, enterprise value. That wasn't really going through your heads at the time when you were out at the fruit market doing Excel spreadsheets. But how has this experience changed your perspective on being business owners and being entrepreneurs now that you've had this experience? How does it affect how you think about your future?
Well, the question is, do we try again with another business? And are we prepared to have another go, have another crack? I don't know what the answer to that is. Maybe yes. I mean, it'd be a shame. I think we have learned quite a bit through this journey, and we would. I kind of feel that what we've learned would save us a lot of time and expense in a new venture. And we, take all the learnings and mistakes that were made in the past and apply it. Theoretically, we could apply it to what we've done, not make any mistakes, avoid the pitfalls, and potentially replicate it in something. And that's if we want to go down that path. Do we need to? We probably don't, but I'm not too sure if we would. But I do feel we're pretty equipped to take on another business if we wanted to, based on what we've learned through the journey, through starting it, growing it, dealing with team members, and just sort of what we've learned. And then coming out through the exit. But it's a question of, do we want to do that? Do we want to go through? Do we need to? And do we want to go through it? Because it's once you're in quite a bit. I mean, we always worked in the business, and I think one of the points of difference was with us was that we kind of weren't afraid to get our hands dirty and understand the detail, truly understand the detail, truly understand the problems, and then being involved in coming up with solutions and getting involved in executing the solutions. So, when you take that approach, you're sort of, you're involved. You're sort of, it's hard to get yourself out of that. So, do we want to put ourselves back in there? Is a question that's being asked of us, and we ask each other, and we'll take our time to work it out. I think.
Yeah.
Good plan, I reckon. Good plan. And I must know what you've learned about, not many husband and wife teams can succeed in being business partners. And you guys clearly sort of carved out a space for your own roles based on stuff that you were strong at or naturally, leaned towards. And I know you also had to pick up a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
Maybe just, you'd never really thought that you'd had to learn about. I know, Anita, I remember chatting with you and like, well, I didn't think I was going to have to be learning all this stuff about SEO, but you actually became very proficient in building the back end of the SEO sort of strategy in the business. But what did you learn about how to make a husband and wife partnership work as co-founders?
I don't know how we did make it work, but it kind of just did. I guess we didn't really step on each other's toes that often. There's no shortage of stuff to do, and we wore many hats. So I think we maybe naturally gravitated to certain areas partly based on experience, and I did what Paul didn't want to do a lot of the time as well. That's how I ended up doing the marketing. And we kind of just we both like to figure out problems, I guess, and solve problems. So I think it worked because we had the same goals for the business at the end of the day. And it was more about how do we get there. So it felt like we were just trying to figure that out together. I mean, we obviously disagreed sometimes, but look, we'll disagree sometimes, but then we just get over it and get on with it and, move on to the next thing pretty quickly. So yeah, it kind of, I think it just worked because we had the same vision. Maybe if we wanted to take it in two totally different directions, that would have been difficult, but that wasn't really the case. Yeah, and I think again that came back when we were trying to.
I think actually.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I was going to say, I think actually, one of the things about the you had alignment in the direction, but one of the pitfalls that I see is sometimes there are really different values in the how you get there, and really different approaches to, for example, how you make money-based decisions. Like one person wants to hire super senior people and let them hire everybody else, and somebody else wants to hire just super junior people and manage everyone. And there can be really big differences that can cause a lot of conflict. But I think, as you said it, I really enjoyed watching you both have a very pragmatic approach and always just seem to take a kind of pretty logical, unemotional, okay, well, that needs doing. You do that, I'll do this. You have your space, I'll have my space. We'll just make it work. But you always seem to find your way through very calmly. Anything you want to add to that, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, we were always, as an organisation, we're always very lean, and so we just didn't have the luxury to dwell on things too much. It was okay, well, let's do this, and have you solved that problem? Because if you solve that problem, we've got this problem to work on next. So there wasn't much time for sort of navel gazing or over analysing what the other person was saying. You were very, very outcomes focused, and also even the way we got to is that outcome, or is the way we've solved it, is it perfect, or is it good enough? And is good enough to move on? And if that was okay, then we didn't worry about perfection, I suppose, in what we did. It was close enough is good enough in this instance. So we then moved on, and that's sometimes what we need. We don't disagree very often, but when we do, I don't think we dwell on it either. We just sort of, okay, it's sort of, if Anita's upset with me, I can tell, and we deal with it and we move on. So it doesn't linger. But that doesn't happen all the time. It doesn't happen very often, and we get on really well. So I know. It doesn't. Maybe it doesn't happen as much out there as it's happened with Anita and I. But we're a good team, and Anita's great. Look, Anita's great at whatever she turns her hand to.
Well, I think it's been.
She's fantastic at whatever she decides to put her mind to. And when she was all in on this, it was a bit of a game changer for Nexacu. When we put the kids into daycare, and Anita started coming into the office, and she was present with the team and stuff like that. The business went to another level. And we sound a lot off each other as well, and it might continue over the course of a few days. There might be a conversation that we just jump into at different stages. There could be going to bed or getting ready in the morning, and we'll go, hey, what about this? And then we might continue the conversation, I don't know, at lunch or, while we're washing up. So that's sort of sometimes how we made decisions. But to be honest, we're working so much in the detail of it that sometimes the answers were pretty obvious. It were very obvious what we needed to do. And sometimes our staff were the ones that were telling us what to do. Well as we relied on each other, but our staff were also very important because they were really bought in, and sometimes they they'd come to us and I think this is what we need, and we agree, and we go on, okay, this is what we'll do.
Fantastic. Well, I think it feels like a sort of natural place to wrap up the conversation. I just want to say a huge thank you to you both. First of all, for letting me into your world. It was great to be able to support you on that journey, and I was thrilled for you to get such a great outcome. Secondly, I think there's just a lot. There's a lot that people can learn about. That I feel like you guys really. I don't know if you surprised yourselves, but you figured out pretty quickly that you were actually really good at running a business together. You had really great and sound principles around the way you just sort of pragmatically knocked decision after decision after decision over. You kept a very strong eye on financials, on the leanness of the business. You're willing to work super hard. Everybody pulled their weight. I think, the way you built the business, and, fair to say you built an incredible system behind your business, which really helped you build a lot of efficiency, a lot of automation, a lot of workflow improvements that really helped you keep that business lean as it scaled. And so, hats off to you both. You did an incredible job. Thank you so much for sharing your journey with the audience. I'm sure people will have taken a lot from that. And I really look forward to seeing what you do next and remaining in touch with you both.
Great. Thanks, Sean.
So thank you very much for your for sharing today. No, my pleasure, Anita.
Thanks, Sean.
And folks, if you enjoyed today and you're looking to build a kick-ass growth strategy like these guys put in place and set up for your exit, then you should probably check out the Scale Up's Roadmap program, where we're going to be doing exactly that, taking groups of founders through a process where they build their growth strategy and execution plan for the next 3 years with a very strong eye on what kind of exits they might like to achieve over what time frame, and how to make sure they can look at the ingredients from businesses like Nexacu, things that dial up scalability, things that really contribute to valuation. Doors are opening pretty soon on that, so if you want to have a look, just jump over to scaleupsroadmap.com.au and check it out, and we can give you all the details. In the meantime, please feel free to subscribe, leave us a review, or share this episode with somebody who you know would love it. You've been listening to the Scale Up podcast. I'm Sean Steele, and I look forward to chatting to you again next week. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much, Anita. It's been lovely to chat to you again.
Thanks. Sean. Cheers.
G'day everyone, just a couple of quick things before you go. If you have questions that you'd love myself or an upcoming guest to tackle about challenges that you're facing in scaling your business, please just jump straight on the website, scaleupspodcast.com. You can record your message straight from your mobile by hitting the button on the right-hand side of the page, or you can just email them the old-fashioned way, questions@scaleupspodcast.com. And just a quick reminder, nothing we spoke about today constitutes financial or business advice. If you are considering making big decisions in your business, seek out a professional who can look at your situation in detail and make sure you're getting sound, personalised advice. Thanks for listening. Look forward to being back in your podcast feed next week.